took him at his word, sat down and watched the movie. We were talking for a second about it last week when we were wrapping up Silver Bullet, and I said we're going to get back to some Hammer, and he just kind of quietly said it's not Hammer. Yeah, it's not. You have that same look on your face. You're like, it's not Hammer.
Almost shamefaced, because I have to admit, I bought this movie. I bought the DVD because I thought it was a Hammer flick, and I was into collecting Hammer flicks for years. Yeah. And I was like, ooh, there's another one. And I didn't read the thing. I just sort of grabbed it. It was like a $5 DVD at Borders or something, and threw it on the shelf and never watched it for years. Just sat there in my Hammer collection, and then I pulled it out and watched it. And I was like, wait a minute.
This isn't Hammer. This isn't Hammer. And on that note, if you're ready, I guess we should get it going. You good?
Yeah, do the thing.
Boogie boogie. So in keeping with the old expression that it's darkest just before the dawn, this movie came out 1 year before The Exorcist.
Yes.
So, you've got quite a variance here, opposite ends of the spectrum, so to speak.
It's no
You've got Peter Cushing. Mm-hmm. And I said this in the social media prompt that I put up for today's episode. I said you got Peter Cushing, you've got Christopher Lee, you've got Telly Savalas.
Yes.
How the hell is Telly Savalas? Okay, but you've got Telly Savalas. You've got what might be the missing link in society, sure. But that bridge that we scientists have always been looking for. You've got a Trans-Siberian train ride. And then you've just got a plot that makes absolutely no fucking sense whatsoever.
It kind of does. I mean, you have to kind of.
There's some appreciative things in here that I actually did appreciate. But I remember texting you last night after about an hour. It's a 90-minute movie. It's like 87 minutes or something like that. About 1 hour in, I remember texting you. I'm like, bro, this movie. And you're like, I know, right?
It makes total sense. I started laughing. I'm like, yeah, man.
Holy shit.
Yeah. I sat down and watched it last week and tried to pay attention and tried to get on board like I did when I was a little kid, and I saw it on a Saturday afternoon. And it's a rough ride, but it's the kind of ride I enjoy because this is a Spanish production, and it's not made for our American sensibilities, even in the 70s. No. And it comes from the same place that all the spaghetti westerns that Clint Eastwood was in. It comes from that same place where the plot doesn't really make sense, or they're not spoon feeding you the plot. There's questionable editing, but it does make sense in a way. It is a pretty good movie, but the cinematography, the cuts, the dialogue, it all reminds me of spaghetti westerns. So that's why I'm drawn to this movie.
It reminds me of spaghetti westerns. It reminds me of the old black belt theater, dubbed Chinese Run Shaw kind of thing that we used to see, again, with, very bad editing, because I guess they were editing if there was any nudity or extreme violence, because sometimes those movies could be extremely violent with the torture or something like that, and they would just make these bad cuts and you're like, oh, what just happened there? But, that didn't mean that I didn't sit down in front of the couch and watch, Creature double feature. And it reminded me of some of those too, those old 70s movies like Bloodmaster or something like that, or Count Yorga, or, something along those lines.
And here you go. This movie is a joint venture between a Spanish production house and a British production house. I think it's called Benmar. And this British company made one of my favorite, 1970s really bad horror movie in that vein, but very, very British, called Psychomania.
Okay.
I think with Malcolm McDowell's in that.
Oh, okay. Okay.
But yeah, that's they made this, and it totally makes sense that it
Well,
would remind you of that.
what this movie was made because one of the producers obtained the train set from another movie called Nicholas in Alexandria.
Hmm.
And he just came up with the idea of writing this script because he just wanted to. It was like, well, I've got this set, and let's just write something up about this.
Yeah,
It's completely, just kind of a spur of the moment impulse. Let's make a movie about this, And there were
yeah,
these rumors that this was the train set from Dr. Zhivago later on, but then that ended up getting shot down. They're like, no, this was from this other movie
right.
that came out the year before. Telly Savalas, I think, was under contract with this Spanish company. He had just come off making Pancho Villa,
Uh-huh.
which shows you, I mean, where things were. I mean, in 1970 or whatever, Telly Savalas is playing Pancho Villa, this sort of thing. You'd never get away with that today. And I've always wanted to watch that one with oh God, Antonio Banderas. I've always wanted
Oh,
to see
okay.
that Pancho Villa. That's supposed to be pretty good. But okay, but what I think what the real draw is that you've got three mainstream stars in here.
Yes, most especially it's Cushing and Christopher Lee,
Yeah,
which is why I bought it. I love those two guys, and it made me think, oh, Hammer, let me
yeah,
grab it, because those two
yeah.
together is just a fantastic combination in every one of the B movies I've ever seen.
Yeah, and you almost didn't. I mean, one of the behind the scenes sort of things is that you almost didn't get Peter Cushing
Right,
because
right,
his
right.
wife had just died.
Yep,
And he was very distraught about it, and he signed on, and then he showed up, and suddenly he was just, I can't do this. It's
hmm,
I'm not in a position. I can't right now. And they had brought Christopher Lee on board.
yeah.
Who's
Christopher Lee was the guy who talked him into staying.
yeah,
Like, he
he's
actually sat him down and got him through the movie. And I think
yeah.
Christopher Lee was like, "This is my chance to play an actual human and do some acting. Don't screw it up for me." Because
Well, let's hope it wasn't that self-centered. I mean, it might have been, but I enjoyed Christopher. I enjoyed both of them in this movie. I
yeah,
especially enjoyed
Peter
Peter
Cushing
Cushing
especially.
because it was like a really bad Hammer movie, but with humor.
Yes.
There was like Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee are typically humorless characters. And
Yes.
they just are, in the horror genre, and then later in the sci-fi fantasy genre, it's Star Wars, and then Lord of the Rings, and then all these different things. There's no humor in anything that they do. They're just villains, they're
Right.
just straight up villains, Saruman, does not get a lot of one-liners, going in all those movies. But here it was just, they were just playing against type.
Yeah.
And I really like. Okay, let's kind of start from let me backtrack a little bit. It starts from the get go, and the credits sort of open up, and it's got that Argento kind of feel to it, or this is
Yeah.
pre-Argento actually, with the bad lighting, and like if a hula girl from like a Bond movie had come out and just started dancing right in the middle of it, like I wouldn't have been surprised. And you
Right.
can see that they've got like this low rent kind of font going on in the credit, for the title credit, and it's
Very
not
modern.
anything that looks scary. Um, and of course, one of the editing tricks that they did back then, I think, with a lot of Italian and Spanish movies, was that they filmed the movie with no sound,
Uh-huh.
and then later they would dub over, the sound onto, so it's like this editing mix.
Yep. The whole
I
thing. Yeah.
I don't know exactly what the rationale for something. I mean, this in of itself is interesting to me.
Yes.
Um, just to hear the other process and the background story. It doesn't necessarily help the movie all that much, but there's a lot that I learned. Or
It's
there are
definitely
several.
cheaper. It's a cheaper way to go.
Yeah,
You
I
don't
think
have
this
that
was.
many people. You don't have to have that many people on set. You don't have to have the sound crew on set. You don't have to feed them, and then you're just in one room dubbing. For days.
And I think they said this movie was made for like $300,000.
Hmm.
So I mean, they made it on a shoestring.
Sure.
And you got three mainstream stars for the horror genre. Maybe not Telly Savalas so much, but just to have Telly Savalas in a horror movie, that kind of drew me because I didn't realize he was in it.
Yeah.
And that he's only in it in the last 30 minutes.
Right. But he shows up and steals the show.
Yeah, he does. He does. I've never actually applauded someone getting flogged.
Yeah.
When he pulls that little, horse's, quirt out or something and just starts whacking that stupid monk, it's like, hit him again. Just keep hitting him, just don't let him get up.
I love his costume. He's like, I'm a police officer. Really?
It looks like he's in a bathrobe like some hotel, or he like pulled one of the curtains off the of like some 70s hotel room or something like that,
He looks like he is Dr. Zhivago just showing up in the thing.
Oh, geez. I've never actually seen Dr. Zhivago, so I don't know. It's not one of the movies that's really on my list or anything like that. But all right, so this starts off with you've got Christopher Lee as an anthropologist, a British anthropologist, a knighted anthropologist, seemingly well regarded, who brings this discovery of this humanoid, kind of being that he places in a crate and then, loads onto this train.
Yeah, it's an Iceman.
It's like Iceman, that old Timothy Hutton movie. And he loads them onto the train, and before he can get himself settled, who should show up but his old cinematic rival, Peter Cushing.
Right.
Now, what was humorous about this was that almost instantly a sort of begrudging rivalry occurs because Peter Cushing is like sort of making some jokes with him, what are you going to thrill us with this time? He's kind of jabbing at him a little bit in that British gentleman sort of way. And you can see like he's really getting under Christopher Lee's skin. And then there's the issue of Christopher Lee not being able to get a seat on the train, even though he's reserved a seat like 3 weeks ago. And so Peter Cushing says, well, there's a way to go about this. And he quickly pulls out just a wad of cash, and pays the guy, and he's like, oh, they call it this, around here. You may not know these sorts of things. And so Christopher Lee's like, well, I call it bribery and like immoral or something like that. He goes, hold on a second. And typical, because Christopher Lee he's kind of imposing in this because you realize how tall he actually is.
Right.
And he just kind of walks over to the guy and puts like his walking stick down or something on the table and just knocks all the guy's shit like right off the table. And he's like, give me my goddamn ticket right now, you little, something or other. And kind of scares the guy. He pulls out that Christopher Lee face for a second. Guys like, oh, okay, yeah, your ticket's right here. But I mean, it's got to considering you've got the premier Hammer stars right there. It doesn't have a Hammer feel to it.
Not at all.
They aren't able to, and I don't know, maybe they weren't trying to. I don't know. Because it was 50 years. It's almost 50 years. It'll be 50 years next year in 22. Right. They couldn't bring that Hammer vibe. And it certainly isn't a Terrence Fisher vibe.
Yeah, I don't know if they're trying to bring a Hammer vibe. They're going after a whole different kind of movie. They're doing the strangers on a train trope, which has been done a bunch of times up till that point. They're just sort of adding horror onto it as a draw. But 90% of this movie is not horror. It's just drama on a train with people shaving each other.
Yeah, well, okay, maybe I didn't get that seeing it. Well, I mean, quickly see. Here's where it started to come apart. I mean, you've got this other guy, Pujardov, who's like this Rasputin type character. That he's saying, that crate is evil, and don't let it on the train, and they're doing all these campy kind of things, like the chalk won't write on his box, right. On the crate, these sorts of things. It's hard to, I don't know. I think where it started to, like, the path started to diverge a little bit for me is when you realize, of course, and you realize this is from the beginning, the thing in the crate is alive.
Right.
It's not dead. But then he ends up picking the lock.
Yep.
Like
Sure
on
does.
the and you're like, wait a minute, this thing's been frozen for 2 million years. How does it know how to pick a lock? Not
Right.
only does it pick the lock, it like bends the one nail, like, into this perfect lock picking thing. And
Yep.
you're just like, oh, is he really doing that? Okay. So, I mean, I don't know if that's intentional comedy or I don't watch that many Spanish films. So, whether they're trying to add just some like deliberately campy kind of humor to it, I would have to imagine that they have to be. There's no way that you could like legitimately,
It's just you got to suspend disbelief with this movie, man.
yeah,
And
and they're
but
just
you find out later that it's not just a caveman,
right,
that
right.
it's completely something else. So it makes sense eventually.
Right, and yeah, okay. Thank you for because I didn't make that connection, and now that you said, yeah, of course I make that connection because one of the things I do appreciate about this movie is that you find out it's not the thing in the crate. That there's actually kind of a parallel with The Thing, like Carpenter's The
Right.
Thing, where
Right.
there's like an alien intelligence that inhabits these bodies,
Right.
and then absorbs the information from all the previous hosts and
Yep.
just keeps making this cumulative kind of base
Right.
of
And you might not
information
notice
and
it.
knowledge.
You might not notice it. It's not really, spelled out for you. But as the thing absorbs more and more of other people, it stops being this skeleton, this frozen skeleton, and starts to grow all the hair and becomes a whole different looking thing as it's absorbing different people's energies.
Yeah, now that I appreciated, and I wondered, because technically we're only 10 years away from Carpenter's The Thing.
Right.
And you wonder, and I never saw the original with James Arness, that
Mm-hmm.
original The Thing. So I don't think it had anything to do with what Carpenter ended up doing. You wonder if he borrowed from some of that because this was a well-reviewed movie.
Yeah.
Like this was a well-received critically. Like this won like a script award. That like blows my mind to hear that, but it did. It won like a best script award for that particular year. They said the one place that it didn't do well was actually in Spain in its home audience,
Right.
but in audiences or in countries where they were used to sort of campy humor or campy horror, like the UK and the United States, it was actually very well received. So you wonder if maybe a student filmmaker, at that time, like John Carpenter, was like, "Oh, I like that idea of things kind of jumping back and forth and
Right.
absorbing all this information." And then 10 years later, Carpenter turns it into his thing, which is actually quite impressive.
It could be. I mean, it's definitely not. It's definitely not The Exorcist by any
No,
means. I mean, the
no.
writing's not really there, but they do make an attempt at creating different characters that have tension against each other. And when things go wrong, each one of those characters, you see the tension increase between them in their interactions. But it's not really well spelled out. Like you've got this industrial spy, Matahari. You've got a countess. You've got a Russian Orthodox priest, Rasputin kind of thing. You got a detective. You have the two British guys who are at each other's throats, basically the whole time, trying to shade each other out. It's a lot like a drawing room drama, but
it could be an Agatha Christie or something like that. Yeah,
that the people are dying.
Yeah,
and then of course they go for the cheap scare, the cheap gore when they're cutting open the guy's head and examining the brain, which has all been smoothed out.
Yeah. That was another thing. When this thing, apparently the way that it's sort of almost like a vampire, and the way that it attacks you, and the red 70s eyes come out, and you just fall to the ground, and you're kind of bleeding. And then when they perform the post-mortem on you, your brain has been completely smoothed out. I don't know what that means exactly, but it's taken all of your information and just killed you. It's like completely uploaded you or at least, all the information in your brain, and then you just kind of die. And then
Yep.
this thing just kind of moves on to the next person all the while. And this is very Carpenter-like. You don't know that the person next to you is the thing for all intensive purposes. You
Yep.
don't know that it's the missing link. So,
and you know what the direct descendant of this is, and I hope we cover it in a future episode, is the Jamie Lee Curtis movie Terror Train, which is very gory, but it's the exact same sort of trope where, you're stuck on a train and people are dying and you got to figure out who's doing it and why and what's happening.
but that's not a supernatural movie, is it?
No, that's a slasher movie.
That's a slasher flick. Yeah, okay. All right. Which, I mean, they all go back, these types of slasher flicks, and they all go back to Christie, Agatha Christie.
Yeah, exactly. That's
yeah.
all the reviews that I've read, all name check Agatha Christie as far as the plot lines and the pacing of this movie.
Yeah. And we had, just on a side note, literally today, I just finished a really excellent modern version of And Then There Were None.
Okay.
And it's not, there is a Christie, and I've seen seven, Murder on the Orient Express, that one with Brana,
Right.
this, that, and the other. But if you do get an opportunity because like what Christie would do was have someone like Perot or, Marple or, something, and you knew that person was going to solve the case.
Mm-hmm.
When it comes to And Then There Are None, there's nobody.
Right.
And it's just grim and it's graphic and it's just, it's just bleak and it's fantastic. It's fantastic stuff. But yeah, all this train stuff starts with Murder on the Orient Express.
Mm-hmm.
And all the train movies that we've seen, from then on, just kind of end up there. So this thing is just down. And now here was another thing too. Of course, when they examine the eyes and then put the eyes under the microscope, and then you could see the last thing that the eye saw, and I'm like, oh, wow. And
that's the one. That's one that I didn't understand when they're examining, and they're like, "Oh, look, it's a pterodactyl." Like, what?
Or the one thing saw the planet Earth, and you're like, oh, no. I literally, when I wrote down my note, I've got it right here, and I wrote, oh, no, with like exclamation marks. I'm like, oh, Jesus, these people are just shameless. I mean, it's just.
The one lady I feel bad for because she's just taking a ride on a train is the female doctor that they.
Oh, yeah.
Hey,
Peter Cushing's assistant.
Body open with us, and she's like, what? And next thing you know, she's pulled into this mystery.
Yeah, and she doesn't. She's not long for it either. She doesn't last very long, unfortunately. Now, all these things are happening, and these people are dying, and you understand, we understand, unlike Carpenter's version, who the thing actually is.
Right.
We know at all times. So it's like Hitchcock in that way, where Hitchcock talks about how you play God. You let the audience in on everything. And then it's up for you to figure out if the main stars or the heroes of the movie are going to figure it out, so on and so forth. And then, with 30 minutes left, they throw you Telly Savalas.
Yes.
The last honest Cossack.
Yes.
Telly Savalas is playing a Cossack in this drunken bathrobe. He looks, it's just... It's kind of hard to get your head. I'm like, what the hell is? I don't think was he in the Dirty Dozen? He was one of the Dirty Dozen, wasn't he? And he's in Kelly's Heroes.
Yeah.
So he was in all those old 60s and early 60s, late 50s kind of tough guy movies, But for me, Telly Savalas was Kojak.
Yeah, but this is pre-Kojak.
Oh, yeah.
It's kind of like the storyline of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. He's an up-and-coming star. He hits a rough patch and has to go to Europe to make a bunch of movies under contract, and then he can come back and rebuild his career.
And that's essentially what happened. I mean, he was under contract with this Spanish company, like we said, doing Pancho Villa.
Mm-hmm.
And so I guess they just jumped him in with this, and they threw him in there with Peter. I mean, of all the people to throw him with Peter Cushing and and Christopher Lee. You throw Telly Savalas in there, and you're like, okay, that's an odd pick, of anybody.
It doesn't
I
make
guess
sense
it's better
for
than
us
huh?
because it doesn't make sense for us because we grew up watching, Kojak. But I
Right.
guess in
But
1972, who's this bald guy? He's
well,
not bad.
he almost reminds me of somebody from like the Rat Pack.
Right.
He's more of a tough guy than he's not a horror actor, I guess is what we don't know him in any sort of horror flicks whatsoever. And it looks like he's going to establish law and order because he's coming on there with guns and he's smacking people down and he's just not taking any kind of crap. But then, he ends up buying the farm too, and all of his soldiers end up buying the farm. And the Rasputin character becomes the thing. And yeah, they end up bottlenecking everybody in the last train car. And then I guess in this last gasp, in like the last couple of minutes, all the things that have been killed by the thing end up rising up, like the Night King, and like that episode of Game of Thrones where he just raises all the dead people up in the long night. And everybody just bum rushes the remaining people that are alive. 95% of them have absolutely no, involvement in this story whatsoever. So basically all that's left really is Cushing, Lee, and the Countess.
Right.
If I'm not mistaken, the beautiful Countess, of course, because she is
the
beautiful.
The industrial spy gets taken out.
And that's
along the way too.
And that storyline is never really explained. She's just some woman who's kind of, moving into like
to steal Christopher Lee's discovery and bring it somewhere, but we don't never know who her boss is or what the stakes are. It's just, I'm here to seduce you and take your ape man. How she knew he had an ape man, who knows?
Yeah, that's exactly what I mean. But I mean, if she wanted to move into my room, I'd be all right with it too. Yeah, sure, come on in, take the fucking ape man. It's a fucking ape man. What am I going to do with him? What the fuck? So, in the end, of course, and then it just kind of ends.
Yeah,
it just ends.
That's another thing about European movies. They don't really have the explosive denouement of American movies. Like, you don't need this big song and dance at the end. The third act just sort of ends.
Well, I mean, I don't know if they have more. I wouldn't use the term evolved because that's slightly condescending, and I don't mean to say it in a condescending way. But I mean, I think that they've moved more in sync with Western movies. Like, if you see a foreign film nowadays, like, you couldn't make a movie like this. People would be like, "What the hell were you thinking?"
Mm-hmm.
You need to get into a 12-step program or something like that if you were to like produce something like this today. And I have several foreign horror flicks, and some Russian, and they're really rough on the editing. If you've seen the Night Watch and the Day Watch movies, and those sorts of things, or like French films like Raw, and certainly nothing like what Del Toro did with Pan's Labyrinth. I mean, that's just a fucking opera, know. But yeah, in the 70s. And this is one of the reasons.
To say that didn't happen in the U.S. too. If you watch those Samuel Z. Arkoff movies, they do the same thing. And I don't know if he's ripping off the European movies or if it's
vice versa,
the way that it happened. But all those early 70s movies, they don't really explain much. They sort of meander and then.
Give me an example for one of those.
Oh man, the Death Master is one. The hippie vampire movie.
Is that Death Master or Blood Master?
Whatever.
Okay, yeah.
Blood Master. Same thing with
that was a creature double feature.
The Vietnam vet who comes home, but he's a zombie movie, and that one's never really explained.
Well, you'd have to do a lot of explaining for that, yeah.
The precursor to Evil Dead, called The Equinox, is another one that's just sort of meandering, and then what happened? And that was on HBO now. You should check it out.
Oh God, I don't know. I need some distance from this one. This just happened yesterday, so I don't know. I got to mull this over.
Right. Well, but you could always go to the Guy with No Name movies. All the spaghetti westerns that East.
Oh yeah. Those I'll watch. Lee Van Cleef.
Mm-hmm.
All those guys. Yeah. I mean, it's an interest. If you're a fan, and for anybody who's going to watch this in the replay, and we do get some views on these sorts of things. If you're one of those people who likes 70s campy horror flicks, this is right up your alley.
And that's me.
I'll tell you
That's
something.
Me through Dr. Shock on Saturday afternoons and Stella on Saturday Night Dead, where I would just watch them and love them.
I don't remember ever. Stella came on at like 11:30, and I would never stay awake that late.
Right after Saturday Night Live was Saturday Night Dead in Philly.
Yeah, I remember.
Always up till dawn every Saturday watching.
She was the local Elvira.
Yep.
Yeah, with the plunging neckline. I remember.
Yep.
I remember.
She played the same quality movies too.
Yeah. This is almost like something you would see on like Mystery Science Theater.
Exactly. Yeah. So Horror Express is one of those ones that would pop up every now and again in the middle of the night, and I would watch it, and it would just be so different and so weird that I'd love it. It's like a night flight thing.
But because, and this is the draw, you've got Christopher Lee, you've got Peter Cushing, you've got another star like Telly Savalas. I mean, if you were to take them out of this, I wouldn't. I wouldn't be able to enjoy it. There'd be nothing enjoyable about this. But because they are there, it is enjoyable because you are seeing, or parts of it are enjoyable. If you are watching, and want to see them play against type on something that's humorous, like Peter Cushing with a sense of humor, that one line where he's like, "We're British. How could we be like untrustworthy?" You're like, holy shit, Peter Cushing just made a joke. Like,
yes.
And you get
they did great performances with lousy material.
Yeah, and you're like, wow, like maybe these guys, had much greater range, and could have done more. Like I would have loved to have seen Peter Cushing like in more comedy.
Yeah, which is probably why they jumped at the chance to do this movie, even though they had to go to Spain to do it, because at the time, Hammer House of Horror was taking a nosedive, and they were looking down the barrel of a semi-pornographic vampire future movie like the Atomic Brides of Dracula, which they did and was horrible.
Yeah. Once Hammer hit the 70s, it was.
Yeah,
it was all over, but the shouting, as my dad would say.
Yeah, thank God for Star Wars, or Peter Cushing would have disappeared and no one would have ever remembered him.
Yeah, and I'm glad that that wasn't his last movie, but it's the last one that most people remember.
Mm-hmm.
And so much so that when they did Rogue One, they brought that character back, and it was great to see him, and it was great to see that character in the Clone Wars. Tarkin, it's just fantastic. And of course, we had many more decades of Christopher Lee, and so it's always great to see him. So again, if you're a fan of, 70s campy, kind of movies, this is your movie, with some mainstream, horror stars in there.
Yeah.
It's probably worth at least one watch, just to say that you've done it for the experience. I'd go so far as to do that.
Yeah,
and then you make your own determination from there, whether you're a fan or whether you'd want to watch it anymore, or that sort of thing. But yeah, it's worth at least one watch, just to see these guys do something different. Within the horror genre, because then Christopher Lee was another one. He made a couple of like pretty bad movies in the 70s and 80s.
Sure.
He did that Howling sequel with Sybil Danning. With the only great part about that was when Sybil Danning like ripped her clothes on. You're like, oh, okay, this is all right. This is all right.
Pornographic.
Yeah, this has nothing to do with that werewolves, but you're like, okay, this movie's it's not a complete loss. All right, I think that's as good a place as any to kind of bring this to a close. Unless you had something you wanted to add.
I have nothing to add other than watch it. And I think up till recently it was on HBO in a nice, crisp, high definition remaster. I have mine's lousy. It's like they took the film reel and played it up against the wall and held a high 8 camera. But it's a terrible transfer.
That's thanks for reminding me that this is playing currently on Shudder.
Okay.
I watched it on Shudder, and I believe it's also playing for free on Tubi right now.
No, there you go.
So this is something that you can, watch if you have that free on Tubi, or if you have Shudder. I think I pay $5 a month for Shudder or something like that, and I use it every once in a while. And for something like this, it comes in handy. They got rid of it once November rolled around on HBO. Okay, I think that's it for us tonight. Tomorrow, we are subbing what was going to be Phantom of the Opera for a Universal classic, spur of the moment change. We're going to be looking at Claude Rains in 1933 with his classic interpretation of H.G. Wells' The Invisible Man. So tune in tomorrow night. My thanks again to the Wilhelm Express for recommending this movie and coming in one more time to BS around and talk some horror. And okay, we'll see you again tomorrow night, 8 p.m.
Killer.
Peace.
That's it.